tous. Hello, everybody. I'm Stella André. I'm representing Notre Bon Droit Europe. And my colleague, Isabelle, bonjour Isabelle,
Bonjour.
is the president of Notre Bon Droit. So we would like to welcome you to our first lunchtime conference of Notre Bon Droit Europe. And it was very impressive yesterday because we launched this a bit, not randomly, but we tried. And as you know, we had to change the platform because there were so many requests for registration that we have to organize. So we would like to thank all the colleagues registered. The conference will be available in any case in replay at the same link, as you know. And yeah, we were happy to welcome you. For those who don't know us, we are the most representative and active civil society association in Belgium. Our main mission is to defend the rule of law, as well as fundamental freedoms and liberties for all EU citizens in Belgium, but not only, because we have several branches. We're quite active as well in France. We try to be active in Luxembourg, in the Netherlands, and as well in Quebec, Canada. Myself, I'm an EU lawyer, an international lawyer, and we work together with a team of professionals consisting of European law lawyers, Belgian lawyers, attorneys, medicine doctors, researchers, scientists, coming from all over the world. And I have to say it's quite an honor to work with so many experts in that field worldwide. We have a unique approach. We defend and promote not only law, but also science in an independent and critical manner. So, as you know, just to make a brief introduction, the COVID crisis has been quite challenging, not to say the least, for all of us. And many measures have been taken in member states to limit the spread of the virus. We do realize that for governments, it was quite a difficult task, considering what was at stake. And for the last months, the COVID pass, however you call it, a health pass, the COVID safety ticket in Belgium, the EU digital COVID certificate at union level, has appeared in many countries, including some specific member states like France, Italy, and soon Belgium, like the only way to come back to normal, our normal lives. So we will address today the scientific aspect of the pass, because we do realize that the legal aspects are also important. And to this end, we will organize another lunchtime conference with lawyers in order to, let's say, address some of the few issues at legal level. But today we wanted rather to get the opportunity as the first conference to understand some of the science and scientific principle behind the implementation of such pass. We consider it's legitimate to ask ourselves about the scientific principle, and if, I think it's the most important, from a lawyer's perspective, if at the end of the day, such an implementation will actually allow us to meet the objective announced, meaning containing or stopping or limiting the propagation of the virus. That's the reason why, and so it's our pleasure to welcome today our friend, Professor Bernard Rentier. In that regard, because you may know that Professor Rentier is one of the most renowned virologists and biologists worldwide. He used to be the former rector of Université de Liège. If I'm correct, you all got his CV in the invitation, so it's quite impressive, and we're really honored to work with him on sometimes a daily basis for our mission of Notre Bon Droit Europe. So welcome, Professor. We're really happy to have you today. I'm going to give you the floor for your preliminary presentations. Just to make a few comments, people can leave their question in the chat for those who are connected. You can leave your question both in French and English, and we will answer them in both languages, although the presentation is in English. And last point, for those who are following and are not connected to YouTube, you can send your question live to notrebondroit.europe at protonmail.com, and I will see them live. So there's no problem. If you don't want to connect, no problem. Just send us the question directly to the mailbox next to me. I will see them live. So thank you. And please, Professor, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Stella. Thank you for the invitation. Indeed, as a virologist, I've been very much concerned with what has happened in the last year and a half. And I am a little bit dismayed by what is going on in terms of tracking and controlling the proliferation of the pandemic in Europe, and particularly in my country, which is Belgium. Usually when I'm asked to talk about COVID, I'm mostly going into a number of characteristics of the virus. Being a virologist and also being an immunologist, I'm also concerned with the immune response that we provide to the virus, and of course, in the same line, with the vaccination as it is performed nowadays. So I will not go into these particular aspects of vaccination, of the different vaccines, the fact that people talk about a vaccine and not many vaccines, which are absolutely not all equivalent, and some of them being very, very new, and without a long-term observation of what can happen. I'm not going to go into that at all, because the subject today is more about the certificate. Let's call it that way. It has a different name in different countries. But the certificate is a very good intention idea of trying to find who is potentially contaminating others and who is not. And this has been appearing as a necessity to many people, and certainly not to everybody, but to many people, because of the idea of reopening widely several areas like restaurants, movies, theaters, operas, and all kinds of gatherings where people are together. We have been under the idea for a year and a half that distance between people is essential. And this is due to the fact that the virus is a respiratory virus. As opposed to many other viruses, respiratory viruses are well known to be transmissible by airborne, so by the air. In fact, by very small micro droplets of water, which is something that we exhale at every respiration all the time. And so the possibility for the virus to spread from one person to another is apparently through the air, and in fact in these very, very small droplets. This, of course, makes it more difficult to control, and it links directly the transmission to the concept of proximity, being close to each other. This is why confinement has been put on. The lockdowns have been decided even several times. Every time when the transmission appeared to increase significantly, which happened, of course, at the spring of 2020, then in the fall of 2020, and then to a much lower extent in the spring of 2021. This concept, of course, has a very strong impact on social life, of interaction between people, interaction between pupils and teachers, or between pupils and students among themselves, and every type of congregation of people together, like nursing homes and so on, are areas where it is of common sense that the propagation of the virus must be favorized by proximity. But there are, of course, strange observations which have shown that there are some people are super spreaders, which means that they have a very high viral load in their respiration, and so they spread a lot of virus, and it is more the track that is likely to be the most efficient way for the virus to spread. It's through super spreaders rather than large assemblies of people. This is a first observation which is important. Then the virus has also characteristics. The virus is a virus which has its genes, its genome, as RNA, which is different from several other viruses, but similar to a number of others as well. In general, viruses with RNA have a very poor efficiency in their replication, because they actually make mistakes when they are in your cells. They make mistakes when they are replicating. They make a large number of mistakes, and sometimes these mistakes are being corrected by a biochemical mechanism that is correcting errors. The coronaviruses are very well known for having a very, very poor system of reparation. In other words, every time that a virus is actually replicating, and replicating in a large number of new particles of virus, let's say that the virus can make 10,000 of new virus particles starting from one. In these 10,000 of particles, there may be only one which is functional, which is okay, which is fine, and which is going to work as a virus. It's not fine for us, but it's fine for the virus. And all the others, the 9,999 others, are just not functional. They are just like ballast. They're contributing to what is called the virus load. This is very important because it means that the virus needs a very high load to be propagated from a person to another person and be infectious into this other person. This is the first thing which is extremely important. Second thing which is very important is the fact that the virus is mutating. In other words, let's go back to our 10,000. One will be okay and will be able to infect another person. But among the 10,000, there might be another one, which, because of these changes that knocked out all the other particles, may be even more functional, functions better than the original. So that's when, with this mutation, you obtain what we call a variant. A variant is something that is successful enough so that we can detect it, we can sequence its genome, and we can understand what the mutation was and try to understand why this mutation has in fact improved the transmissibility of the virus. So a virus can become more transmissible. And this is not very original. It's been well known for many viruses for decades. In general, the variants which are more efficient in being transmitted from one person to another, these variants are successful and take over the possibilities of infecting people. They take over from the original strain. So after a while, they replace it. This is what we see with the Delta variant for the time being, has completely replaced all the previous variants and even the original U1 virus. So the fact that the virus is more efficient in being transmitted is giving it an advantage, a selective advantage in Darwinian terms. In other words, evolution is in favor of these viruses which are transmitted more quickly and more efficiently. This does not mean that the variant is more dangerous. It does not mean that it is more pathogenic, meaning giving disease. So a variant can be more efficient, can overwhelm the whole system, can chase away the previous variants or the previous strains, and it can be over the place, but it can be less lethal. It sends less people to hospitals and it kills less people. This is what is usually seen. This is what we are expecting from the new variants. But of course, nobody can be absolutely sure and can guarantee that the virus will not be more dangerous. It can happen. It is obviously not the case with Delta, but it could happen with another one that may show up later on. The trouble with these is that their success is also linked to the fact that the people in whom they are entering are or are not immunized against it. The difficulty that we are facing nowadays is the fact that Delta virus has changed enough so that it's not as well recognized by the antibodies of the people who have had the disease in the year and a half before. So it's not as well recognized as the original strain. It's even more striking with vaccines because the vaccine is being concentrated on one single protein of the virus. And whether you have a change in that protein, of course, the coverage, the immunological coverage that you've got from your vaccine is, of course, more quickly inefficient to new strains. That is the difficulty, and that is why we are not hearing very much about third doses, fourth dose, and possibly new vaccines with new strains and so on. So this is really the difficulty, and the fact that one does not completely understand every detail of these mutations that are occurring, and the observation should be very careful. Okay, so that's a very important point, the mutation and the emergence of variants. But there are other characteristics of the virus. First of all, as I said, it's a respiratory virus. The way that it's propagating is very, very characteristic. There are mutations and variants, but there are the disease, the spreading, the pandemics itself is a zoonosis. A zoonosis is how we call an epidemic when it can be spread to animals, or it can be spread from animals to humans. This is very characteristic of all coronaviruses known for many, many years. And there is what we call an animal reservoir, which means that even if we would be completely eradicating the virus from the human, the humanity on the mankind on the planet, there would be still a reservoir in animals, and it's not just domestic animals; it's also wild animals, birds, bats, and all kinds of wild animals all over the earth. So the virus can always come back, even if we would be able to get rid of it in mankind. That's also a very important point in terms of thinking about the vaccination as the only way to get completely rid of the virus. It's utopia. It can never happen. So what it does is that it slows down the way that the virus is spreading, and it puts people on the safe side in terms of complication and serious disease and death, of course. So, but considering the vaccination as a way to get completely rid of the virus is a mistake. And this is unfortunately a mistake which has resonance in the certificate, because the certificate is basically based on the fact that people have been vaccinated or not vaccinated. So if you're vaccinated, you get the certificate. If you're not, you don't get the certificate, and so you don't get access to the same things. One serious difficulty here is the fact that when people are vaccinated, they can be infected by the virus anyway. This discovery was, of course, very concerning. And it's probably due to the variations and the variants that are able to infect people who have already had the virus and who are supposed to have immunity, or the people who have been vaccinated with an earlier strain. So when you use a certificate to determine who is going to be entering a particular place, you are in fact considering that the people who are vaccinated are safe, and they're safe for themselves and they're safe for others. That's the basis of the concept. Who else can enter? Anybody who is not vaccinated but can show a negative test, whether it is for by PCR, and I think I don't have to re-explain what PCR is. It has become very popular, or an antigenic test, which is a way to look at the virus that you have in your airways, uh, nasopharynx, and throat. So that's a way to see whether you are actually carrying the virus. First, well, of course, this is the good way to give a certificate. But if you consider that vaccinated people can carry the virus, they should be tested as well. So if you talk about a safe ticket or a safe certificate, you must consider that the only way to guarantee almost completely, maybe not absolutely completely, but very largely, guarantee the safety for people themselves and others, the only way to do it is to test everybody. That is not done.
Yeah. Sorry, Professor.
Yes.
Sorry, because we have quite a few questions and I don't want to
Yes.
interrupt you. But at the
Okay.
same time, what you say is very important because to sum up in absolute term, if we want to be consistent in order to tackle the objective we have, meaning preventing, for instance, I know in Belgium it's going to be for restaurants and things like that, but we see in the United States that it's in office buildings. In order to reduce the spread in offices, basically, they in the United States, especially in the New York State, they really want to impose not only the pass but mandatory vaccination, which is another problem. But if I follow you, actually, the most important criteria would be testing.
Yes.
In absolute term, being vaccinated or not, yes, as I understood,
Yes.
protects you from catching or having the adverse consequences of a very serious, deadly COVID sort. But it's the most relevant thing in order to tackle the objective would be to test everybody.
Yeah,
or no one.
I think the mistake now is when you consider that the vaccination is being made to protect others. There is now the demonstration that you're actually not protecting others when you're being vaccinated. You're protecting yourself against serious disease, but as you can carry the virus, and maybe less than if you're not vaccinated. But nowadays there are papers, scientific papers coming out showing very clearly that the viral load in a person who is infected by the virus and vaccinated or not vaccinated is the same order of magnitude of viral load. So in other words, one should stop considering that being vaccinated is a way to protect other people. That's a very important point. The way to protect other people is to make sure that you're not infectious, and the way to do that is by testing. Now, there is a difficulty with the PCR testing because the PCR testing is so immensely sensitive that it will track all the little particles of virus that I talked about earlier, which are the defective particles, the particles which are not infectious. And so the viral load is mostly constituted by particles that are not infectious. And so if you have a very sensitive test like PCR, then you are going to spot viruses that are not dangerous at all, that are not infectious. A much better way is to look at antigen test. The antigen test is actually looking at the virus itself, and it measures, it becomes positive with less sensitivity, which frightens some people because they say we should be as sensitive as we can. But being too sensitive is getting over the reality, which is, are you um, are you potentially contaminating others or are you not? And in the first approximation, which is reasonable, I think, the testing, the antigenic testing, is fine. So this is really what is important.
Thank you,
And so,
Professor. But I have a question for that. Sorry to
sure,
cut you off again. Sorry.
sure,
Um,
Jackie.
so indeed, you were talking about the sensitivity. For those who are listening to us, it's something that we analyzed and discussed many times. For those following us, it's the problem with the CT, the cyclic threshold, to how much they amplify the signal. I mean, when you what do we say, when you analyze the sample. And we publish many things on this because you will correct me, Professor, is that normally a PCR test is not supposed to be a diagnostic test for unasymptomatic people. Is that correct? It should be used on people who already have symptoms. And now we have asymptomatic people, and because they have a PCR test positive, depending on the cyclic threshold used, they consider as a threat. So I think it's quite remarkable. And I was wondering if you could answer this. Why do you think everybody or most government or member states focused mainly on those PCR tests rather than antigenic tests? Do you have any idea why?
Yes, I have an idea why. It is the PCR is a fabulous test. It has been developed for a number of things, um, like finding DNA and in murder cases in just dry droplets of blood and things like that, where there is very, very, very little material to find. So amplifying is really helping to detect whether it is there or not. In virology, it has been developed for AIDS virus, HIV. The HIV can be in some cells, in blood cells, and if blood donors, I'm talking about the years in the 80s,
Mm-hmm.
the blood donors uh, had to be checked for HIV, and the PCR was really a technique where in a whole pocket of blood uh, just collected, you in that you could just take a small sample, and if one single particle of virus was present, you would amplify it and find it. So, in terms of diagnostic, in terms of detection, it is a fantastic tool. Now, it can also be very interesting for COVID because it can tell us if it's done in a proper statistic and random way in the population. It can give us an indication on how many people have actually encountered the virus at some point, whether they are still infectious or they've never been infectious, or they will maybe never be infectious. But if they carry any track of this virus, it will be found. And so this is, in a way, to guarantee in terms of epidemiology, the real knowledge of how much a virus is actually spreading and in what speed is it spreading. But that has to be done experimentally on cohorts which are well characterized. When it's used for you and me, just to know if we should be put into quarantine or not, it is the wrong tool. Obviously, it is giving it's not the problem of the test itself, it's the problem of what do we do with the results? How do we interpret the result? And what consequence are we deciding upon these results? If someone
Exactly.
comes and has a positive PCR, he or she will be put in quarantine for 2 weeks until the PCR gets down, which is maybe not so quick. So so we are actually putting into quarantine people who are absolutely not contagious. And this is the difficulty. The difficulty is in the equation between PCR positive and contagious. That is wrong.
But Professor, I have a few questions, and thank you for those who are writing questions on the chat. But as you know, for those who listen, you can send your questions on the email address of Notre Bon Droit Europe, and I receive a few. So, first thing, Professor, I understand what you say, and the problem is that for those who are in Belgium, but I know some colleagues are following us from Luxembourg, but it's quite remarkable that at political level, science is so different from one member state to another. It's quite disturbing. We all, I mean, I'm talking for myself, but you know, a EU lawyer working for the institution, to me, it's crystal clear. I feel like a European, you know, so I live in Belgium, I'm not Belgian, but I'm flabbergasted that is exactly what you said. The result of the PCR test, you remember at some point in the crisis, people in the mainstream media were terrorized permanently by the number of positive cases, as if
Yeah.
they were going from the plague tomorrow. I'm not undermining the virus, but I'm just saying, as you said, that what is the use of knowing that X people are actually tested positive? It did not reflect the reality on the ground of the reality of the pandemic, because we were talking about dead people or very sick people in hospital, but
Yeah.
a positive case, as you said, it depends. It doesn't tell you much at the end of the day.
No,
So
it does
some
not. But in fact, what happened, especially in 2020, was the fact that we had very few tools to control the epidemics, and there were many very serious cases coming up, and in fact, every time when the PCR testing was increasing, later on, let's say 2 or 3 weeks later, you could see the number of people being hospitalized going up. So
okay.
it was felt that there was a relationship between, and it's quite common sense, the relationship between the number of people who are quote unquote contaminated and the number of people who are going to become sick.
Mhm.
And so this is quite logical. But now we have better tools for that, and also the point is having a good coverage in PCR control of the population may give us an indication a little bit in advance whether we are going to have a new wave or not. The problem is who is being tested and for what reason.
Mm.
If people were tested randomly on a significant level in terms of statistics, it could give us a very good indication on whether it's going up or it's going down or it's quiet or it's expanding. So this is a very important information. But the trouble is that we're taking this information from the PCRs, all kinds of PCRs that are being done nowadays. People who want to go on the travel, people who want to have a certificate if they want to go to a show or to a restaurant wherever it's needed, like in France, and I hope not in Belgium, but it doesn't. It sounds like it's going to come here too. So that is not really related. And using the PCR for the certificate is a mistake. Using the PCR for epidemiology is a good idea.
Professor, I have
That's
several questions, and I will ask to ask them because
yeah.
it was a political choice for some member states to use the PCR test as the golden standard. But as you said, now we know better, and antigenic test should be the preferred instrument. So one of our viewers saying that the Swedish Public Health Authorities, as well as researchers in the University of Duisburg-Essen, state that actually PCR tests cannot demonstrate either an infection, either contagiosity. Is it going too far for that?
It's
Is it correct?
It's going a bit far. I'm sure that there must be cases of people who have contracted, who have inhaled the virus, and but perhaps a viral load which is lower than what is actually needed to be infected. So there is a possibility that people are actually having in their airways viral particles that are dead particles, that are not active. And those are going to be found with the PCR test because it will amplify it very much.
Mm-hmm.
But you could say the same thing with the antigenic test, except that it's much less sensitive.
If I understood well, because we discussed that in our group yesterday, one of our colleagues published, one of your colleagues published this new study saying that saliva test, was it
Yes.
antigenic, were as accurate than any other test?
Yes, that's not new. It's
okay.
It's more than a year old, and it has been used. In particular, it has been very well developed at the University of Liège, whom I know well, and it's been used for all nursing homes in Wallonia. And that was in September, October, November last year. And that's the saliva test, which is less sensitive than the nasopharyngeal test, where the sample is collected very far behind your nose. This is just you just have to spit into a tube, and the whole reaction goes on and is being tested. So it's not a question that the PCR would be less sensitive because it's the same technique, but it's the place where you are actually taking the sample, and there is less virus in the saliva than in the nose. So this is why the sensitivity is lower, and it gets closer to what is actually being transmitted in a contamination. So
but that's the problem then, because if we understood well, the CDC in the United States by 31st of December have decided to shift to new tests rather than PCR tests because they recognize that they were mistakes. But all the public policy, health policy on the member state have been over the last 19 months based on those PCR tests.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that's when you realize that I don't know, I'm speechless because we confine the whole world. With all the social and economic consequences, and on the top of it, I'm a lawyer, okay? So that's the lawyer speaking. I try to look for you have the legal base of the regulation on the EU digital certificate. They do not mention that the PCR test or the antigenic test, because it's recognized in the regulation, has to be invasive. So in some member states, like Sweden, or is not a member state anymore, but I say that because my husband is English. He never had, and he's tested quite regularly because he's going from Belgium the UK quite regularly, and he does not understand why in Belgium or in France you have invasive PCR tests, especially on children. You know, in Notre Bon Droit, we get sometimes per week thousands of testimonies on the ground from people telling us what's going on. And in some places, they want to test children as newborn with a PCR test, invasive one. So is there any relevance in doing it? I understand what you said. There are much more viral sensitivity or viral load in your nose or in your in the nasopharyngeal way rather than the throat or in your spit. But if it's too sensitive in any case, and you want to be close to the reality in order to make public health decision, why do we keep doing invasive PCR tests, knowing that it could be as well on children or specific persons? In the end of the day, could be damageable, because if you keep repeating invasive PCR tests, and it's not me saying it, is Académie de Médecine in France in May, they say repetitive, frequent invasive PCR tests could, at the end of the day, be damageable for those who are submitted to those states. So why do they keep doing the invasive PCR test in some countries? It's purely a political reason at some point, because in the countries where they don't do it invasively, they are not in the fifth wave, and they're not people collapsing and dying in the street. You see what I mean?
No,
So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, don't ask me. Ask them. I don't know. I don't know.
yes,
I don't know why they stick to
yes,
that. We've been we've been denouncing the fact that the PCR was not an adequate tool for detection of contagiosity of people, which is the whole point we're talking about today. PCR is an excellent tool for other purposes, more scientific, more basic, or more global. But certainly not individuals, certainly not babies or little children. It's absolutely not necessary to stick a to put a stick in the very
yes,
back of their noses, and with
yes,
bleeding sometimes. Yes,
yes.
sometimes
And you
can
know, we
spread.
are defending people's rights and in
Mhm.
Belgium, but not only. And I keep repeating it unless I see the legal base saying that a PCR test in Belgium has to be made invasively. I recommend and utterly insist that all of you have your right respected and say, no, I do not consent to have an invasive PCR test. I want a PCR test done in the mouth of God knows,
Yep.
because that's
Saliva. Yep.
yes, exactly, because this is it's illegal. That's my favorite sentence. It's illegal. Professor, we have a lot of questions, so I'm going to shift a bit, because there's something we never talk about. Because in this EU digital certificate, you know, in the legal base, we have the proof of a recovery. So the proof of recovery is that you had a PCR test positive at some point,
Yep.
not too late, not too old, and then 10 days later or 2 weeks later, you do a PCR test, and you are negative, and then you have a
Mhm.
recovery certificate for 6 months. But some people got COVID at the beginning where, well, we suspect they do, because in general they could not see a doctor because they were refusing to meet anyone, which is a pity, and they were just saying to people, stay home, and you take a paracetamol, and from the moment you can't breathe, you go to the hospital, which let's say it was quite unfortunate. Anyway, so people may have antibodies. You know, we could all get an antibodies blood sample to see if we have any. And many people that I know have a lot of antibodies, but antibodies are not recognized. So I'm a bit confused with that. You know, I followed very well the EU COVID digital certificates negotiation between Parliament and Council, but I don't understand why before COVID, when you had natural immunity, although we're not talking about the same disease, I agree, and that you could clarify for us. I'm not talking about measles or rubella, because if you have antibodies naturally because you caught the disease, you have it for life. But still, people with antibodies, they should have some immunity. No? So why
Yep.
antibodies are not recognized? That's the question. Why is not recognized?
It's I don't know. Again, I don't know why, and I'm wondering why, like you do. The thing that we should know about antibodies is that they are only a reflection of the immune status of of the people. Um, there are a number of different things. First of all, the virus comes through the airways uh, to your lungs. And that is the place where the wild type virus is actually triggering your immune system and producing immunoglobulins, which are antibodies. It's the scientific name for antibodies of the class A. So they are called Ig for immunoglobulin A. And the IgAs are being secreted in the mucus of your lungs, and that's where they are ready. If the virus comes a second time, they're ready to neutralize the virus when it comes. But that is not something that we do measure. For measuring that, we have to have a washing of the lungs, which is a very, very, very uncomfortable medical gesture, uh, very unpleasant. And that way you can measure the quantity of virus in the lungs, and you can also measure the quantity of immunoglobulin A in the lungs. But what we do when we have a serologic test is to look at the serum, in other words, at the blood in the circulation, and that is something that is being produced uh, maybe less than the immunoglobulins in the lungs. When you are vaccinated, then you get these antibodies in the blood before even getting them in the lungs. So the process is completely reversed. So it's very difficult to take conclusions, to draw conclusions from a positive or negative test in the blood. But of course, if you have antibodies in the blood, then that means that, and if you have not been vaccinated, then it means that you have encountered the virus and then you made a very full immune response. So I believe that in a certificate, we should not only test people by antigenic test to see if they are contagious or not, but we should also look at their antibody level and conclude if it's positive, that it's okay, and they are protected.
Yeah, because
The problem
sorry.
is that when you have had the virus, you have antibodies in the blood, and it can go down. In many people, it goes down, and it is actually waiting for the next virus to come uh, before being boosted again. But many people have been positive and are now negative in serological tests. So this is also a difficulty because you are going to tell these people, okay, you have no antibodies, then you cannot have the certificate, which is very unfair because they should have it. So if we did follow by serological test people week by week after they have had the disease, that should be a good indication, even if it goes down after a while.
Yeah, because they're actually somehow discriminated because
Yeah.
compared to a vaccinated person who did not do the test and potentially is contagious and
Yeah.
can spread the virus around him or her, and this person who just had COVID and have a sufficient, for the moment, level of antibodies, I recognize that the difficulty is to say, okay, how long could you have the certificate if you have antibodies, natural ones? But at
Mm-hmm.
the same time, we see the I mean, first, I think it's insane. On marche sur la tête. Nothing is logical in this thing. We're talking about science. Science should prevail, not political decision based on beliefs. Sorry, you're one of the most renowned scientists I know. We defend science, scientific facts, nothing else.
Absolutely.
But the cherry on the cake is that the antibodies, and we see that with the Israel example, is that even if you have antibodies induced by the vaccination, the number will decrease with time, and then it's the reason why you need boosters. So that's exactly the same principle with natural antibodies, and perhaps the vaccine antibodies you get wear out even quicker than that. I don't know, but I put that on the table. Maybe they wear out even more quicker than the natural antibodies. So what are we doing here? Is there anything that makes sense in this whole picture of COVID pass? Because if you remember, my questions, and that's the purpose of this conference, is that does the COVID pass achieve the announced health objective to protect and limit the propagation of the virus?
Yeah. Definitely, the answer is no.
Yes, voilà.
The answer is no, as long as this certificate remains based on the same wrong basis, of course.
And we have a question. We have an extra question. Sorry, but that is maybe more
yes. I just wanted to add one thing, and it is that if you follow what I'm saying, you will conclude that everybody should be tested before attending an event, whether you're vaccinated or not. And this is a totally paralytic system in social life. So, in other words, when I say everybody should be tested, I really think nobody should be tested.
I understand.
And this is the concept of a certificate is really a way to put aside a part of the population and on the other side another part of the population. And so this leads us to believe, for instance, that the vaccinated people are dangerous people, and that the not vaccinated people, the not vaccinated people, the unvaccinated people are dangerous, and the vaccinated people are the good people. And so this is really beginning to emerge in the social networks. You can see that very well, and I think this is very worrisome. And I'm also worried when I hear physicians saying that people who are not vaccinated should not be given the same care as the people who have been vaccinated. And I think this is really leading us to a society which is something I don't want to live in.
But first of all, for the moment, and I know that the rule of law is almost dead in the Union, but nevertheless, it's illegal. You cannot discriminate someone or limit access to care or society on a vaccinal status. That's basic principle of EU law, the charter. I don't know. It goes against everything I thought all my life. And for those who are listening, sometimes notre bon droit, because we're asking questions legally and scientifically. We are attacked because people say we're anti-vax, which is far from being the case. I would like to take the opportunity to say we are not anti-vax, but we are for critical independent science. And I want to preempt any attack on Bernard Rentier, the professor. He could not be him labeled as anti-vax because he has defending vaccinal policy for the last 30 years. It's just that in the current context, we have the right to ask the legitimate questions. That is something I wanted to say. Parallelly, if you see in the news that the terror principle in the news, we could read this week on, I forgot which mainstream Belgian media, is that, oh my God, we have 7 dead a day by COVID. And of course, it's horrendous. But then I asked Bernard and his team, but what is the normal rate on a daily basis? They say to me 300. So, okay, 7 people died from COVID out of normally 300 people who died every day. And, you know, some statistic or some professor in other countries say, but unfortunately, out of those 7 people most of them would have died anyway in the next 6 months, in the next year, because in general there were people at risk. So the problem is that we derive in the all COVID spectrum way is that all our life and everything is surrounded by COVID. And as you say, Professor, in your position, if you were able to take the decision, you will not test anyone anymore. Not the general population, especially if they are symptomatic, which would make absolutely
I wouldn't
no
test.
sense.
I wouldn't test anybody, before letting them have a normal activity. Uh, but I would certainly test people to figure out what's going on with the virus, and I think that that's a very good thing to do in terms of an epidemiological control in the country. Of course, this is fine. But as you said, we have 300 on average. We have 303 deaths per day on average. More in the winter, a little less in the summer. In a country like Belgium. But when we have, like we had in 2017 or 2018, we had influenza epidemics, and flu epidemics, seasonal flu, and we reached 150 people dying per day.
Wow.
At the peak of February, March 17 and 18. That's not long ago. And we didn't take any particular measure at that time.
Yeah, but Professor, it means that in an ideal world where science and independent science would be the justification to implement some specific measures, we will go back to normal basically and live with the virus before. Because if I understood well, considering what you say about this reservoir, even in and it's not what we're advocating for, although we're not anti-vax, we are not necessarily pro-vax, we are for consent, informed consent, and freedom of choice, considering, as you said, that vaccinated people just protect themselves. So voila. And secondly, is that even if we had 100% vaccination rate of all human beings on Earth, we will still have the COVID.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, so we can't reach herd immunity. It's like, I suppose. Sorry, you are the expert. It's like a cold, or it's like the flu. It's the same principle. It would be seasonal, and people will get it in any case that they're vaccinated or not. But of course, if they're vaccinated, they will have a milder version. But it's the same. By analogy, it's the same, isn't it? So we have to live with it.
It is. And it is exactly something that we know with influenza for a very long time. And we have vaccination of elderly people for influenza for 50 years, more than 50 years. So,
we have other questions.
We know very well that we never get rid of influenza, whatever happens. There's always a new strain to come.
And I have two questions, if you don't mind. One about variants. You said that. I have three questions actually. I should start the other way around. Talking about natural immunity, we also know that you can be immune, although you don't have antibodies, through lymphocyte T cells action.
Yes.
So as cross immunity. So those people as well. I mean, it's empirical, but I'm perfectly sure I had COVID at least a couple of times. I don't know. I had all the symptoms, but I was not tested because it was at the beginning of the pandemic. And I don't have antibodies. I was shocked because I really thought I had. But could it be possible that some people like me, and maybe I'm not saying it is the case, but maybe they're protected by their cross immunity? And in that case, how do we check that? Can we check?
It's feasible that the cellular immunity can be checked. It's more difficult, and it's much less used than serology. But indeed, it could give us a very important indication. The most efficient immune response to viruses in general is through cellular immunity by T lymphocytes. The system has evolved in nature to fight viruses, while the system of antibodies was got more developed against bacteria.
Okay.
But also antibodies are able to neutralize the virus. But we have, as human beings, we have several tools, several immunological tools to fight against viruses. In fact, what the cellular immune response does is destroy our own cells when they are invaded by virus. Before they become a virus nest, which is, of course, important in the infection. And that can be measured. And there are nowadays new tools which are more rapid and more feasible than the old tools in laboratories that took ages to get the response, to get the answer. So yes, it is possible to test that, and one could very well you could very well have no antibodies, but there's still a boostable T cell response.
I see. I don't know if it will be of interest, but I will tell you that another time. But apparently, my CD4 plus are top of the roof. So I don't know if it helps, but
Yeah.
it's yes, okay.
Yeah, there are ways to look at it. Yeah.
That could be that. I have a question from Pascal. She would like to know, it's a very specific question, so it's for Pascal benefit. When you do an antibody detection, which is more accurate, on a dry blood test or a traditional blood test?
The most reliable is a test, is an ELISA test in a laboratory.
Okay.
That is by definitely the most accurate answer. If you look at a test like a small home test, you get a good response, but I think the level of mistakes is a little higher anyway.
Yeah, and thank you. I have many questions. Oikar, I will give you a question in a few minutes. I have a question regarding vaccination and variants. We know we heard a lot of things about that. Could you perhaps clarify for us? Is it true that mass vaccinating, considering that we had the alpha, beta, I forgot, delta variant, and now we have the mu variant, the Colombian one, apparently is completely immune against the vaccine. The vaccine doesn't work on the mu variant. So question is the mass vaccination during the pandemic, first question, is it normal to vaccinate mass scale when there is a pandemic? First thing. And second thing, is this mass vaccination favor the appearance of variants? So is it normal to vaccinate for a disease while we are in the pandemic for this disease? And secondly, what's the consequence of this mass vaccination on the appearance of variants?
First question is no, it's not normal, but in fact, it's because we have no experience of that. This is the first time that we have been able, as humankind, to produce a vaccine during the pandemic, and that's due to the fact that they've been so quick in preparing these vaccines. Usually, it takes years to have vaccines, and so it's more difficult to vaccine during the epidemic. For flu, we actually do vaccinate during the epidemics, because the strain is identified early in October or September, October, the first cases, and then the vaccine can be prepared for later months. So it's not really a statement that we can make saying that it is not recommended to vaccinate during the epidemics.
Okay.
But the reason why there is a concern about this is the fact that this is characteristic of these vaccines, which are focused on one single protein of the virus. And so a mutation within that protein is sufficient to make the next generation of virus safe from the antibodies produced by the vaccine. Because we have many other antigens on a virus, and if you get the virus for real, then you will make antibodies against all the antigens of the virus. And if one changes, all the others are still there, and the response that you've made is still valid for quite a while. It will take a longer time for all the antigens to mutate and to be different. So this is of course theoretical, but obviously theoretically, if you focus your vaccination on one single protein, then you increase the chances of having escape mutants, escape variants during the pandemic itself.
So actually, just to say it in let's say more vulgar terms, the virus is alive. So it's very intelligent, and is let's say its objective is to survive in hosts like us. Okay. So if we realize that they're immune for that specific variant type, I don't know how to say that in a vulgar manner. Okay, I'm going to mutate, so I will keep surviving in other hosts because I will have mutate, so I can still survive. Is that this logic? So actually, if you vaccinate on a specific, stem, variant, or protein, I don't know what is the correct term to use, the virus actually will have all the latitude to actually mutate, to adapt, to survive. Is that correct?
Yes, of course. The way you tell it is
it's very simplified. I know. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I know. But because the virus is not intelligent and is not thinking of anything, but it is. But the fact is that it has a very high rate of mutations. So it changes all the time. And if by chance the change is such that the virus is no longer recognized by antibodies, then he gets all the landscape for himself and he can go ahead and infect people. If he enters into somebody who has antibodies against itself, against the virus itself, then the virus is neutralized and has no opportunity to replicate and to propagate, and it's done, it's finished, it's dead in a way. So the problem is to know exactly what kind of response you've been able to make, and obviously you don't make the same response if you are facing the virus with all the antigens and a single protein of the virus, spike, the little spike that is on the external part of the virus, and there are many spikes, but each spike is identical, and the response that you're making against the vaccine is a response against the spike only. If the spike changes, you don't recognize it anymore. But
Yes.
if you have a wider immunization, even if the spike is no longer the same, the rest of the virus can be the same, and you can then still neutralize it. So this is really something very complex, but it's even more complex than I'm telling you, because on the spike there are several antigens, and
Yes.
also and when you're making antibodies, you're making either neutralizing antibodies or not neutralizing antibodies, or even worse, enhancing antibodies that are actually helping the virus to enter the cells.
Yeah,
So
exactly. Yeah.
this is
We
a
have,
this is a very complicated story.
sorry, it's exactly because we have questions on that, and I promised then the question for Ojikar. I promised I'm going to ask you questions, but as I want to rebound on what you just said. If we speak about les anticorps facilitants,
Yes.
ADE, so in English it's if I remember well,
Antibody
antibody.
dependent
Yeah,
enhancement.
dependent enhancement. So I have two questions on that. One question from Balco. Thank you, Balco. Could the equivalent level of a viral load in vaccinated and non-vaccinated people could be a potential evidence of ADE? Because is it voilà, is it an evidence that
Uh,
you, yeah,
well, I don't see the link actually.
okay,
Mm, No, the ADE is just a very strange phenomenon that exists with some viruses like dengue fever, and in coronaviruses. It happens to be a class, a category of antibodies that are not neutralizing the virus. They stick to another part than the one that would make the virus unable to enter a cell. They are on the lateral side, and somehow they contribute to the fact that the virus can stick to the cell and enter it, because there are two phases in infection. The first one is the virus has to stick to a cell, and then it has to sort of make a hole. Let's say make a hole. That's not what happens, but the image is clearer. Docking to the target, then entering the target. These are two actions. And the ADE antibodies are helping the second action, which is the one that makes the virus enter the cell. It's, of course, a wrong response from us, but it is something that has been put into application by the virus themselves, also by evolution of the virus. We don't know how much ADE antibodies we have. They are much less than the neutralizing antibodies, fortunately. But they do exist. And the danger when you are using very, very narrowly pointed vaccines is the fact that you may increase the emergence of ADE. But still, this is very theoretical. And as everything in science, there are people who are saying this is a very serious danger, and others that say this is not important. So when you say we should rest on science only, I warn you that science is
yeah,
not consensual,
no,
and
I know,
that there are different opinions. And when you read scientific papers, you can have absolutely contradictory conclusions from two types of experiments. And it's very difficult to know which one is true and whether the one that is not true may be true in some circumstances and so on. So it's very, very difficult,
it's
and
tricky, but
it's tricky. It's very tricky.
but of course we tend to prefer studies where we assure that the scientists in charge are not in conflict of interest. That would be one of the paths to follow, to know who. Yeah, but I completely understand. So you just I mean, you can suggest to some extent that the COVID vaccine could increase the risk of AD. It's
a possibility.
yeah,
And it
exactly.
has been very strongly defended by some scientists
Yes.
who've been very noisy on this, and
Yeah.
who have been silenced very much. But maybe it's just a useless fear, but maybe it's true. So we don't know. We need more investigation on that. Much more larger numbers.
I have a question. So it's Ojika question. Is it true that all injected people are less infectious than non-injected people, notably because the period during which they could contaminate other people is much shorter? So basically, if I'm vaccinated, I'm contagious, but less because I'm contagious much less time than a person who is not vaccinated and contagious, but the period in which it can contaminate is much longer. Is it correct?
It is
true?
possible. It hasn't been clearly demonstrated.
Okay, but possibility. Okay.
What has been demonstrated is the viral load is the same, and now even Dr. Fauci has made a statement on that. It's the amount of virus that you're expulsing, whether you're vaccinated or not vaccinated, if you are infected afterwards, is the same. But whether it lasts longer or the same is not demonstrated. So I don't have the answer.
Okay. I'm telling colleagues, we're going to last 5 more minutes, and we have a lot of interesting questions. I would like to reassure you that we will organize other conference, and possibly if Professor Rentier is available again to answer your question, that would be great. I will not enter into details about the possible remedies because we will need a whole session for that. I will just continue with saying that, for those who want the scientific sources, normally we put each time we have JAMA, BGM, PCOS, all the scientific journals with articles. We put the study in our online scientific library sur notrebondroit.be. So you should find all this scientific source. If you don't find them, tell us. You also have a lot of very interesting resources on COVID Rationnel website, to which Professor Rentier is a member of. So voilà. But now I would like to ask the professor the key question. We hear here and there that it would be entirely possible that along the COVID safety ticket in Belgium, that we will strongly fight against legally, it will be possible that a similar COVID pass is implemented on the EU institution to the whole staff. So what would you tell to the people, the authorities currently discussing this about the health objective, knowing that we have seen some of us in office that vaccinated people are scared, like, I don't know, if they look at non-vaccinated people as if they're having the plague. So you have vaccinated people, sometimes they don't want to share offices with non-vaccinated people. There are a lot of pressure for non-vaccinated people to be vaccinated against sometimes their own will, because the non-vaccinated people, and you saw the declaration of the Premier in Belgium, is that, and it's not only there, is that it's the responsibility of non-vaccinated people if we keep having restrictions. And it's a pandemic of non-vaccinated people. So the non-vaccinated people are becoming like the new scapegoat and the reason of all the curses of the universe. So what would you say to the people currently discussing such a decision to impose the pass? about people who are not vaccinated, but also about the test? What would you tell them?
Yes, I would simply remind everybody that it is clear now. It may not have been clear when the first idea of a certificate emerged, but now it is very clear that the whether you're vaccinated or not vaccinated, you are a potential contaminator, and so deciding that the people who are not vaccinated and who, by the way, are, are not infected, uh, except if it happens that they are, but these people are exactly the same people as the one who are vaccinated and who can perhaps also be infected and carry the virus. So the discrimination which is made on something which is not different between people doesn't make any sense. That's all I have to say.
Professor, would you be? I mean, I'm not sure the members who said they would attend are attending today. I think a lot of people actually are going to see in replay. Just for your information, we got 527 requests for registration, which is quite amazing, and we were very impressed. But only 1/10 of this registration are currently viewers. So we assume, as people know, there will be a possibility of replay. They will look. They will watch later our conference. But Professor Antier, I'm sure all this information will be of extreme importance to our members, I mean, members of the European Parliament. And I think we should organize another session with some of them, because clearly it's this kind of critical, nuanced, but balanced information we need in order to help the governments to make the best decision possible, let's say on a proportionate and a necessary base. And I would like, and thanks to you, and we're really, really happy you were available today, and I count on you for other session, because I would like to reassure my colleagues, some who are feeling isolated because they're non-vaccinated and they're treated like if they had, as I said, the plague. So I'm sure you're a bit more reassured today, and we need to make, let's say, this type of information go through, because it's what we're fighting for. So,
Yes, I
Professor,
think
I
you
would
need. I
please,
think you
yes.
need to have not only people like me, but of course lawyers, of course uh, sociologists, social scientists, um, and also philosophers, because we are actually entering an era of rejection of the other, and this is really something that many of us would fight against. And I can contribute as I done my best today in terms of virology, but there are also many other aspects to be thought about. And the the fight we've been fighting for a year now with COVID rationnel is precisely to look at other things than the virus, while knowing very well what the virus does, what the immune system does. But the crisis has more become a social and political crisis than a virological crisis.
Indeed. And that's the reason why we have to ask these questions as a conclusion: what type of society we want to live in tomorrow. And I'm calling on all vaccinated people as well, because we don't want to create any separation between us,
Of
vaccinated,
course.
not vaccinated. We don't care. But ask yourself the question: to go back to normal, to have a few of the restrictions you had lift only on a temporary basis, or you will accept another restriction of your freedom, considering there's no legal, and that we will speak about that on another session, and scientific base to impose such a pass, considering it would create such a precedent in our society. And where would it end? You know, it's supposed to be temporary. It was supposed to be for 3 months in France. It's going to be now until summer 2022. we're expecting the final test in Belgium, the modalities test, but possibly it's going to be until summer 2022. But we know from what Professor Rentier said that we will have to live with the virus in any case. And in summer 2022, COVID will still be there. So is it the end of our world as we know it, in the sense that now to go to the office, to a restaurant, to meet people, we'll have to show our pass saying, okay, I'm clear with COVID-19, COVID-23, the flu, HIV. Where is the limit? Do you really want to live in a society like that? Personally, I don't, because I enjoy the freedom and all the marvel, although it was perfectible, that I know, but we were so lucky before, and we perhaps did not realize that much how lucky we were in the Union. So we have to take our responsibility and our duties and do our best to try to let's say, to offer an alternative to that world. It seems that is going to be our future. So I completely agree with Professor Rentier. And yes, we will have the pleasure to host other guests as well from COVID Rationnel. It will be an honor and a pleasure.
Sure.
And I would like to thank you, Professor,
Welcome.
very much on behalf of Notre Bon Droit Europe. And I would like to thank all the colleagues. I would like to make a few announcements. If you had asked a question that we do not answer, please send them by mail again, and we will actually communicate them to Professor Rentier, and he will be able, I'm sure, to give us some element of answer. We will have our next lunchtime conference in a couple of weeks. If you have specific requests regarding guest issues or thematics you would like us to address, although we already have a lot of ideas and guests prepared and foreseen, we're happy to discuss that with you. And do not hesitate to contact us if you need any legal assistance or even legal assistance today in your life regarding the management of the COVID crisis. We are there to help you. If you're discriminated, if you face problem, we are there. And please contact us and have a look to our Telegram, Facebook, website, notrebondroit.be. We are there for you. Voilà. Merci à tous et passez une bonne après-midi. And we'll be in touch. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Thank you, Mr. Professor Rentier. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.